All right. So welcome to today's webinar. Thanks everyone for being here. It's certainly exciting to have so much interest for this webinar. We've had about 20 or so people sign up. So we did one a couple of months ago as well, which was quite similar, and that went well too, but even more people this time, so it makes it worth our time, which is great. So for those of you who maybe haven't come into touch with us before, RTO Advice Group is, we're a consultancy company, so we provide advice to RTOs on all kinds of things from funding to, scope extensions and all sorts of compliance and quality issues. And I specifically specialise in RTO setups. So my head's in RTO setups pretty much all day, every day, and working through how to get clients to the goalpost as quickly as possible. So what I'm going to do, and we've got more people signing in now, so welcome everybody. I hope you've got sound set up and you can hear me, but in a minute I'm going to turn off my video and just do slides for most of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and do that actually. All right. So welcome to people who are still signing in. We are going to kick off because I don't want to waste anyone's time more than necessary, but the recording will be available for anyone who does miss the intro. I'd like to find out a little bit more about everyone else. So if you could punch into the chat bar which of these categories you fall into, just to give me an idea of what you're here for and how I can sort of sway the presentation to what you're looking for. So yeah, are you an experienced vet professional? Have you ever actually operated an RTO? Have you previously worked in the industry, but maybe not in a management or leadership role? Or have you ever, have you never been involved, in fact, in RTOs and, it's a whole new world for you, or something else? A, B, and C. Great. We've got an A, a D, an A. Okay. And apparently we've got a few people calling the office now with troubles signing in. So I've been asked to slow down a little. So I will do that, but as I said, the recording's also available, so I don't sort of want to lag for too long. But yeah, so it's good to see we've got some other people who, I guess we've got a range of knowledge in the room. So I'm probably going to get questions of varieties of shapes and sizes. I would expect some more detailed ones from those people who've said A, and some more basic level ones probably from people who are in category D. I'm very used to people falling in both of those categories, so let me know if I'm moving through something, too slowly or too quickly, because as needed, I suppose. And we've got a C as well. Okay, great. Doesn't look like anyone's in the other category, so I've categorized you all. All right, and what about what brings you to today's webinar? Are you in fact setting up an RTO already, or are you looking at setting up an RTO in the future? Or are you just exploring and researching some options, as a possibility of setting up an RTO? Are you here to do a bit of research on behalf of somebody else, or just after an answer to a specific question? So we have lots of C's and an A and a D. Yep, lovely. Okay, great. So not too many, I didn't get any B's. No one's like 100% dead set. So yeah, obviously exploring and looking for some more information in order to maybe get to a B where you know that you are going to actually go ahead with a future setup. Okay, so Gary said he's had 2 RTOs and looking to get some new info. Okay. Yeah, well, things are always changing, Gary. So the process is very different now from what it was, 6 months ago to sort of 12 months ago and 18 months before that. And not completely different, of course, but there are some differences. I was discussing actually with Neil yesterday about just how inconsistent some of the timeframes are and things like that. So things like that are always changing, the way that the regulator processes applications and the speed that they process applications with. Okay, so this is the content that I'm going to touch on today. So I'm going to sort of go through like what having an RTO enables you to do and why you would look at setting up an RTO, whether it's sort of suitable for what you're looking to do with your business, and an overview of the different registration types and requirements. So specifically that one's going to be covering the difference between domestic RTOs and those that have a CRICOS registration as well, and an inside scoop on operating an RTO, so some sort of things that you need to consider for your long-term success. And what are the sort of minimum operating requirements that you might look at for streamlining your first 12 months of operations, I guess, because a lot of people have grand ideas about what they want to do with their business, and that's fantastic, but you don't necessarily need to start with all of that up and running straight away. Choosing your scope, which is crucial, ownership and entity structures, and delivery model options, and an overview of what resources and systems you'll actually need to get yourself registered. And this one's come from a question I had through email from someone yesterday. So the differences between buying an RTO and setting one up is also something people in a lot of your positions might need to understand before they move forward, or you might be looking at an opportunity to buy one. And an overview of the application process and what happens at audit to give you an idea. And I'll just briefly touch on what you might look for in a consultant. And of course, your questions. We'll actually stop for questions halfway through as well. So just feel free to type them into the chat bar as you think of them as well, and I will most likely field them in the question and answer time. I'm hoping to keep it a little bit shorter than this, but we'll see how we go. Okay, so basically with an RTO registration, you'll be able to deliver nationally recognised courses. Qualifications that are in the AQF, the Australian Qualifications Framework. So that's anything from a Cert 2 to Cert 3, Cert 4, Diploma, Advanced. Those are the main vet qualifications that we look at. And above that, you're sort of getting into the higher education spectrum of things, which is a separate system, but still related to the AQF. So, and RTOs can also issue statements of attainment for single units. And now we also have skill sets, which is a group of units. So only RTOs can apply for certain vet funding contracts that are available through various state and territory bodies and government departments. And the nature and size and type of those funding contracts is all quite unique to the various different states, and the requirements, change from year to year and maybe also very different from qualification to qualification. It is normally qualifications that get funding, not single unit courses. And also only RTOs can actually also get this CRICOS registration in order to bring students into Australia on an overseas student visa. well, actually, technically, CRICOS providers can also do that. They can also get CRICOS registration, but CRICOS is sort of separate because that's only about delivering English language courses, whereas what we're talking about in the rest of VET is really courses that relate to industry needs and employer needs and specific work roles. Okay. So also RTOs can deliver training in the workplace, so that may be traineeship and apprenticeship arrangements. And like I was talking about with units of competency, some of those may also be tied to certain licensed outcomes. And that would require going through the body responsible for issuing those licenses in order to also get approval from them. So yeah, just a little bit of insight. We're sort of seeing, I guess, a lot less of this traineeship and apprenticeship focus than we did like 10 years ago, for example. And yeah, there's just less money available in a lot of those programs. It's only really targeted to certain skill shortage areas. So yeah. So an overview of the registration types. So we are moving towards sort of a national regulator. Well, there is a national regulator now, ASQA, but we still do have a couple of other regulators who are also responsible for RTO registrations. So ASQA is currently the regulatory body for most states and territories, but except for Victoria and Western Australia, in the case that those providers you know, only offer in those particular states. So if you were a Victorian provider and you weren't planning to have any operations or deliver any courses interstate, then you could apply through the state body, and similar in WA. But if the moment you're going to have students coming from overseas, you have to go through ASQA, and also the moment that, you know, your business plan is, you know, to go into these other jurisdictions, either immediately or down the track. Yeah. Oh yes, thanks for that question, Gary. Gary's just asking me to explain CRICOS. I am getting to that, Gary. So yeah, I think it's coming up in the next slide, in fact. So thank you for that. Oh, maybe the next one after this. So we have these state regulators as well for, yeah, like I said, so you've got the VRQA, who's the Victorian regulatory body, and in WA, you've got WA TAC. So there are still a lot of Victorian and WA based RTOs who would be registered with ASQA though, simply because they do have delivery interstate or they do have overseas students. Yes, I'm happy to explain any acronyms. Please continue to sort of pull me up on what those are that I might be skimming over, because yes, I understand, of course, there'll be people coming to this who haven't been in the sector, and there are a lot of acronyms to use and easy to sort of forget that not everyone knows them when you've been operating in this sector for a little while. So CRICOS is for registered providers who want to bring students in from another country overseas to study in Australia on a student visa. So in that case, the students come in on a visa in conjunction with their enrolment into a particular course. So if a student is doing a diploma of business, they would have a certain duration for that diploma of business, and that duration will be mirrored by the duration of their student visa. So, and that's the length of time they're approved to be in the country, basically. So because, you know, CRICOS registration is very much tied to sort of migration requirements, and especially, you know, this specific student visa. So because of that, you've got additional regulations, additional risks as well. So there's additional things to be aware of, and more frameworks and regulations to be around. But, you know, the upshot is that you're accessing markets all over the world and not just in Australia. So you can specifically market your courses in certain other countries that may have, you know, a high demand for the courses that you are offering. And yeah, CRICOS registered providers also use education agents who are responsible for, you know, helping ensure that the student has the correct visa before coming into the country. There's quite a lot to do for the students, gathering documents and making sure that everything that's required for their visa is gathered in advance of coming to Australia and enrolling with the RTO. So the education agent is the middleman there. Oh, thanks, Neil. So Neil's put up an explanation of ELICOS, English Language Intensive Courses for overseas students. Thank you. And an explanation of the CRICOS acronym as well, which is the Commonwealth Register of Institutions and Courses for Overseas Students. Thank you. Yeah, I suppose I'm just going to the sort of like, what does it mean in terms of what does that registration mean? That's the way that I answered that question, but knowing the acronyms is useful as well. So all RTOs will appear on the National Register. So once you go through the process of RTO setup and you've gotten through with all of your compliances, so no non-compliances at this point, and your application's been approved, your new RTO would appear on the National Register under training.gov.au. And you'll have a unique RTO identification number. And yeah, also through this website here, you will be able to see all of the various training packages and qualifications and units that appear under those. So yeah, there's a fair bit to learn there, but there are lots of different training packages and different requirements that you have, both at a unit level and a qualification level and a training package level above that. I should make a diagram for this, maybe for next time. So overview of registration types. So yeah, CRICOS registered providers, in addition to appearing on that training.gov.au, they will also appear on the CRICOS register. So CRICOS RTOs will have a CRICOS unique ID number as well as an RTO unique ID number. And both of those enable anybody to look up the RTO and find out exactly what they're approved to deliver, when they were approved to deliver it, you know, whereabouts, and so on. So all ASQA and WA registered RTOs must meet the requirements of the Vet Quality Framework. And that comprises of the standards for registered training organisations, which was released in 2015. So we're very much still seeing the rollout of those standards. Some things that were announced in the 2015 standards had implementation dates for later on, start of 2016, for example. We saw some changes. So, and you know, there's also been a lot of changes in that time in the way that things are regulated. So, like I was sort of saying earlier about the way that applications are regulated, what's going on in the industry. The Australian Qualifications Framework, that one came out in 2013, the current version. And that specifies the level required for each of the certificates and diploma levels. So for example, a certificate 2 is an AQF level 2, and that denotes a certain volume of learning and depth and breadth of the course. So it says, you know, a level 2 person should be at this level, it's suitable for this type of student, and you know, this type of course duration as well. Fit and proper person requirements is a legal declaration and, you know, a check that is done to determine whether there are any legal issues with the people responsible for managing and operating and owning the RTO. Financial viability risk assessment requirements. So basically it's the RTO's responsibility to ensure that they do remain financially viable. But the regulator also has some sort of a stake in that to ensure that the RTOs do remain above, you know, remain financially viable in the black, so to speak. So there's some checks done about financial viability in that process as well. And data provision requirements, which is really about reporting student data and data which shows enrolments and competencies through a national system according to national specifications. So that also relates to what I'll talk about a little bit later, which is your student management system, which is the database that all RTOs would be required to have in order to enter their data as they go through. So I've had a question, what standards do VIC RTOs comply with? I believe that's on the next slide, so thank you for that. CRICOS providers must also comply with the ESOS framework, which consists of the ESOS Act, ESOS regulations, and the National Code. And thank you so much, Neil has done the quick Google for me again. So we've got Education Services for Overseas Students is what the ESOS one stands for. Yeah, so BRQA registered providers, so that would be those in Victoria who are not registered with ASQA, must comply with the AQTF essential conditions and standards for initial registration, and then once they're registered it becomes the standards for continuing. And also we've had this 2016 BRQA guidelines released, and what that that 2016 release did was actually closer align the AQTF with the national ASQA standards, so that there wasn't such a discrepancy and there was a bit more of an even playing field between what VRQA requires and what ASQA requires. The WA TAC now regulates according to the same framework as ASQA, so the same vet quality framework requirements that I previously showed. Okay, so quality standards. So this is just a brief overview. Obviously, I'm not going to go through every single standard. There are quite a few, but just to give you a bit of an idea about what is in the national RTO standards, which is that 2015. So this is from the ASQA website, and these are this is the focus of what ASQA regulates. So it's really important, excuse me, I'll just go back to that last slide, that all RTOs are required to be responsive to industry and learner needs. So that means whenever you're developing a new course, that you consult with industry to get feedback on the suitability of the way that you propose to deliver that course. So that will be even before you've got approval to have that course on your scope. So through RTO registration, you're going to choose a course to put on your initial scope, and you're not an RTO yet, but you already have to start gathering the documents as though you're an RTO in order to show the, you know, the proposed course and how you intend to deliver it. And you know, it's not only about when you design new courses, it's also ongoingly you're going to, or continually you're going to engage with industry and get feedback. So you might be setting up industry panels and discussion meetings around currency of skills and equipment and what people are using out there in the workforce and how you can tailor your courses to, you know, relate directly to what employers are looking for there. And also, of course, learner needs. So basically it's getting feedback all the time from your learners and from your other stakeholders who might be your employers if you've got students signed up that are from an employer group, for example, you might also engage with industry via employer surveys. But you want to constantly be getting feedback and encouraging that feedback from your students and making sure that you're using that to inform the practice of your RTO. And standard 2 is around quality assurance. So it means it's the RTO's responsibility to ensure quality at all time. So that means not only when you're having an audit, but all the time you need to look into, are you meeting the requirements of these quality standards? Are you meeting the training package requirements of the specific course or qualification that you're delivering? And is there anything you can do to improve the quality, make it more suitable for your students, more suitable for your delivery method, and just a course that is over and above the minimum expectations, I suppose. Standard 3 is around the issuing of your qualifications and statements of attainment if you're delivering single unit courses. They're called statements of attainment. And it's to make sure that when you issue a qualification, you need to know 100% that that student has passed all of the requirements of that course, and that you have processes and checks in place for issuing them correctly, so no qualifications get incorrectly issued, and that you're storing all of that data about when and who was issued what qualifications correctly and securely. So backing up your data and keeping copies of certificates. Standard 4 is about accessible information about services. It very much relates to standard 5. So both of these are really about the information that's provided to students before they enroll in your courses. So it's really marketing and sales, like are you providing access to the right policies and procedures so that students understand their rights before they sign up, and also that they clearly understand whatever course it is that they've decided to enroll in with you. Do they know the duration? Do they know when they have to be at class? Do they know what happens if they don't go to class? And so on. Standard 6 is about handling of complaints. So yeah, what are you doing with complaints? And again, are you clearly communicating that what complaint avenues are available for students? Are you responding to complaints within the time period required? And yeah, do you have all the correct complaints handling procedures? And 7 and 8 is less about students now, and we're going into the governance and administration and compliance, legal compliance side of things. So governance and administration, do you have managers in place and responsible for making decisions and taking responsibility for what's happening in your RTO? Does everyone who's actually taking a leadership role in your RTO have the required fit and proper person declarations? And are you correctly entering and securely storing, your student data and employer data and so on? And standard 8 is about legal compliance. So really, are you complying with everything that you need to, not only in terms of your RTO registration, but all relevant legislation that might need to be covered because of the particular ways that your RTO delivers their courses. Like, if you're delivering in a classroom, does the classroom meet the building code requirements, for example? And also each particular industry and particular jurisdiction that you're going into has its own legal requirements that might relate to the courses that you're delivering, or you might need to have your staff be aware of as well. Yeah, this standard, there's a few crossovers. Like if you were non-compliant with a standard in the CRICOS, the national code, which is like the quality standards for CRICOS, then you could be found non-compliant with standard 8 here as well. So some of them double up. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. So key determinants of success. So these are just a few things that we've found, you know, based on our experience in the industry and what seems to be important for moving ahead. So obviously the quality and currency of your courses is important in building your name and your brand and getting repeat business in the industry and meeting industry demands so that you can get those enrolments from those good and maybe large employer groups if they're around in the industries that you want to access. The suitability and skills and knowledge of your training and assessment staff, of course, are vital. Like the experience that your students have of your RTO is going to very much depend on the staff that they come into contact with through their training and assessment, as well as the other staff, but those training and assessment staff take a key role in the students' learning. And, you know, whether or not your courses suit market and industry need. So you'll understand a bit more as we go down about what requirements, what facilities and resources you would need to have for each course that you want to deliver. So you want to make sure before you go down the track of putting a course on scope that there's a market need for it, and what is the shape of that market need. How can you cater to the need better than, say, other RTOs that might have that on scope? Access to relevant funding models, like this one's debatable. I mean, probably a few of these are debatable, but you know, a lot of domestic-based RTOs might be reliant on funding models at least for a percentage of their income. So having access to those is important. I mean, aside from the fact, I mean, it really depends on your course, I guess, is what I'm trying to say as well. So if you're delivering a course in childcare, for example, in Victoria, childcare is a funded course. So because a lot of other RTOs are going to have access to that funding, it would be very hard for you to compete with a fee-for-service model where the student has to pay when, you know, the students can go down the road and essentially get the same course for free. And obviously the maintenance of registration and funding requirements, so maintaining compliance is vitally important to staying alive. We've seen lots and lots of closures, more and more all the time, it seems. You do really need to manage all your risks there. And are you providing correct attention to students prior to enrolment so that they don't receive a shock when they get into the course? They need to know what to expect so that you can keep them in that course and, you know, ensure that you've correctly matched their needs to the right course and you're enrolling the right students who the course is appropriate for. And part of that is also about, you know, maintaining your quality and your evidence of your quality, because if you enroll students who are not suitable for the course, they might not be very happy with the course and give you a lot of low responses on some of the government surveys that get collected and reported back. So this is my note here. How does this all relate back to the setup process? And that's really about, in my mind, streamlining. So I'm going to talk a bit more about streamlining and walking before you can run. So choosing carefully what you want to deliver initially and what maybe is stage 2 and could be done after your initial registration. So the more courses that you try and to get set up at the start, the more the more outlay you're going to have before you can start enrolling any students, and also the more potential complications you could have with your application. So just an example there, like if you had, say you've got 3 courses that are really good, you've invested lots of money in all the training and assessment materials and developed these great courses. If you now have another one that you think is, oh, it's pretty good, but it's maybe not quite as good as the others, it's probably not worth risking your whole application for that course that might not have as good quality or compliance as some of the other courses, when you can in fact add those to scope later on. That picture is not supposed to be there. I'm going to have to fix that, sorry guys. Hoping this doesn't, I'm going to pause the share for a second. Sorry guys, just a moment. Okay, I'm back. Oh, my screens have gone funny. I might just check in with the group if everything is okay. Can someone chat to me? Are you seeing my slide again? Oh, okay. I've got the wrong screen shared. Okay, that must be it now. Thanks. All right, so I just wanted to talk briefly about what are sort of the minimum operating requirements and things that you need to have in place to be operating as a compliant RTO. So you need to have compliant policies and procedures that describe how you meet all your obligations as an RTO in a fair bit of detail. And you need to have forms and checklists to be used for administrative procedures and training and assessment procedures as well as management and HR and all the rest of it. And you need to also have compliant certificate templates. Like I alluded to before, you need to have a student management system. So there are a lot of student management systems on the market. So you just need to have a license for one of those, and it needs to have a VETMIS reporting capabilities that are up to date. So at the moment, I think we're up to VETMIS 7.0. We may have gone up to 8.0 now, but pretty much, I mean, all the student management systems will have the current VETMIS compliance with whichever version of a VETMIS we are up to. And I don't know the acronym off the top of my head. It's a bit hard for me to Google at the same time. But if anyone wants to Google the VETMIS acronym and chuck it in the chat bar, I would very much appreciate that. Preference for a specific SMS, Neil is asking. It's a tricky question, Neil. I've seen ones that I like. I've seen multiple ones that I like, and I've used ones that are good as well. I think it's dependent on the RTO, and you have to sort of look at, you know, what are the key requirements for each particular RTO, like, you know, whether they really need to have workflow function and automation built in. That sort of might depend on the size and type of delivery that they're doing. Are they doing online? Well, then, you know, you would need to have some online systems built into that as well. But if cost is most important, you know, you could go for one that has less capabilities. So thanks, Gary. So we've got people on Google for me. Thank you, guys. So I will make an acronyms slide for my next one, but we've got a VETMIS is the Australian Vocational Education and Training Management Information Statistical Standard. So it basically lays out how the student management system must report that data back to the government. So it lays out exactly where all the fields must be showing and what codes need to show up in the reports for the government to interpret everyone's data about enrolments and student statistical details in the same way, and therefore be able to produce reports about all of that. And the body responsible for producing those statistical reports is NCVER. So that's where all of the EVETMIS data gets collated for RTOs, all RTOs nationally actually. So if anyone wants to have a look at the NCVER website, that might be a good research point actually, because they release lots of reports about how many, how many students are doing various different types of courses and how many of those students are completing and things like that. So it's a good one to be aware of. And you need to always have up-to-date training and assessment strategies for each course that you want to deliver, or that you are delivering and are approved to deliver, as well as all of the resources, materials and tools required to deliver that course. So your strategy basically lays out the details about the course duration, and it will detail all of these resources, materials and tools that are required for delivery, and it will detail the units that are included in the qualification, if it's a qualification, the order those units are listed in, and any other requirements that might be specific to that course or specific to that industry, and how your RTO has catered for those, and sort of why as well. Yeah, so an explanation of why the way that you deliver your course is right for your RTO and your students. So when I talk about resources and materials, that's, the assessment tools and tasks used to assess each unit of competency, and also learning materials, such as textbooks, PowerPoints, session plans, learner guides, whatever shape they might come in, or online content as well. Might be content, but then you've also got to have your assessment tasks that cover all of the requirements of the units. And equipment, so, that might be equipment that's used in the classroom to simulate working environments such as computers and printers and faxes, or it might be equipment for role plays in the classroom, or it might be that you're not doing classroom delivery and you're going to a workplace, and in which case you still need to document, does the workplace have all of the equipment that the students will need to complete the tasks and the learning activities that we've designed for. So facilities, yes, could be classrooms or other places where the course would be delivered. And again, it's about how do those facilities meet the requirements of the course, and any other requirements. So also your industry consultation and engagement strategy specific to that course would go into the training and assessment strategy as well. And must be maintained at all times. So if you've got a course like aged care on scope, you will need to show that you're always engaging with the aged care industry and staying up to date with those industry requirements, and that you've got evidence of that. And you need to always maintain your high quality assessment processes and practices. And one of the ways that you do that would be conducting validation according to a plan, a compliant plan, and that you've got other management and quality systems in place to ensure that you're not accidentally using something that doesn't meet the requirements, and that you're meeting regularly to make decisions about feedback that you've gotten and how those impact your RTO. You will need to always maintain your financial viability and systems around invoicing and accounting, and basic IT infrastructure as needed specific to your team. So there's you do need to maintain the security of data that your RTO is using, or the security of your files if you're going to use physical files. But over and above that, I suppose the standards are not too prescriptive about what type of IT infrastructure you might need to have. So It's up to you to determine, and it would depend on the size of your team and the locations that your team work from, whether you've got a lot of people working off site or, you know, you're really a two-person team and you both use the same PC that's at the office. You know, both of those situations would have different needs. And you will need to ensure that you always have skilled trainers and assessors to deliver your courses. And that those trainers and assessors maintain their skills regularly by undertaking professional development relevant to the roles and the courses that they deliver. You do need to have a physical location, but this is not an onerous requirement. So your registration will have a physical location, but it can be a home office. There's no specific requirement for you to have a specific sort of physical location. You just need to have a physical address tied to your registration. File storage, like I said, if you're going to have physical files, if you're going to have electronic files, can be done that way. But similarly, you know, you will have to think about how you're going to keep the files safe and secure and backed up in either scenario. So there are some, I sort of am mainly talking about the domestic requirements, which relate to both types of RTOs, whether you have CRICOS or not, you have to meet the domestic requirements. But there are some additional things required for CRICOS. That is that in most scenarios, CRICOS providers would be required to have a building to deliver their courses in, because it requires face-to-face delivery methods. And in most cases, workplace delivery is not suitable for CRICOS courses. So they're usually done in the classroom. And students, there's an additional requirement for CRICOS that students do 20 hours of face-to-face every week of the duration of their course. So yeah, due to that, you'll have to maintain a building and a timetable for that building to show that you have the right number of students in that building. With CRICOS registration, you'll be approved for each qualification that you apply to put on your CRICOS scope of approval. You will also have a capacity. So it's also your responsibility to make sure that you don't go over and above that capacity without applying to actually add more students to your registration. There are a few additional policies and procedures and things to be aware of in terms of visa requirements and dealing with the migration departments and education agents as well. So in the first 12 months, nice to have things that you can have if you want to do well and deliver well and succeed in business. These are things that, of course, any business that wants to be successful can look into setting up. So these are just a few ideas really, but they're not required. So you can decide whether or not these are going to be worth investing in and how soon for your RTO you might want to look into some of these growth strategies and systems to streamline the way that you operate and be efficient. Yes, so I'm not going to read through every single point because I think these are just my ideas really. Does anyone else have something to contribute here? Oh, I've got a question from Neil. Is there a specific award under which you need to employ staff? Look, awards are not really something I normally advise on, Neil. So I'm gonna say I think the awards are as per they are in any industry. Like it, yeah. I can't advise on that basically. I don't know, but you know, awards, you know, there'll be administrative awards, and I'm not too sure if there's a trainer and assessor award, but I imagine there'd be something. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. Does anyone else know the answer to that question? We've got a few experienced vet people in the room. Maybe some of you have done more with employing trainers and assessors than I might have. And this is question slide. So we are at least halfway through, if not more, and I've taken 50 minutes already. So I'm overblown on my promise to be quick, but I'll try to keep it moving. If we don't have any other questions, doesn't look like there's too much else in the chat, so I'll keep moving. Just gonna tab through that. Okay, so deciding on your scope. I have alluded to this already quite a bit. So each RTO has an approved scope of registration that may be full qualifications, basically, or single units of competency, or accredited courses. So accredited courses are sort of like another complicated offshoot of all of this, in that what we're talking about with these training packages is government, let me go back. These are government approved training packages. So they're in industry areas that have, the industries and government have consulted and developed these training packages for specific needs and specific levels, and they're publicly available. So anyone can go onto the National Register and have a look at a training package. If there's a niche area, for example, though, that doesn't appear in a training package, there's maybe no units of competency, or there's not a course that could pull together the right units of competency for what you want to deliver, it is possible to go down the track of course accreditation. It's a separate application process to the process of applying for RTO registration. So if course accreditation is relevant to you, what you would need to do is actually pursue and investigate course accreditation first, and then in order to deliver that course, you then need to apply to be an RTO with that course on your scope. There's a lot more I could go into with course accreditation, but it's a little bit outside of this webinar. So get in touch if you want to have a further conversation about course accreditation, and I can fill you in on that and sort of help you to see whether or not it is actually relevant to what you're wanting to do with your RTO. Now what I'm going to do, just excuse my typing for a second, I'm going to pull up an example of a training package to show you on the government website. So just pulling it up. All right, so share. Oh, it looks like you can already see. You should be able to see the web browser now. So this is the Travel, Tourism and Hospitality Training Package, which was released on the 1st of April 2016. You can see release dates and when previous versions were archived. So previously there was this version of the training package. Anyway, what I really want to show you is that within this, this is the highest level. You can go into a specific qualification and also see the skill sets and units that are part of that training package, meaning they have the same training package code and are written for this same industry. Now if you go into one of those particular qualifications, you'll see a description of what that qualification is intended for, and you do need to be aware of that. When you're delivering this course, it does need to match, the way that you deliver it does need to match this. It also may lay out any specific entry requirements, and it will tell you how many units need to be completed and any specific rules about how many units from each type of unit that is listed. And there might also be this kind of thing where you can select units from another training package to use as part of this course as well, and how many of those. So that's sort of like one of the first things to look into when you're looking at training and assessment materials. You know, you'll need to ensure that anything that you get quoted has the right number of units and the right unit arrangement to meet the rules of that qualification. So just to go back a step while we're on training.gov.au, I'll just show you the main front page If you want to look up RTOs or training packages, you go here to the National Register, and then you can type in a specific course if you want to pull up a training package, or you can put in an RTO name or an RTO ID if you want to go to a specific RTO and have a look at their approval. So keeping on moving. So deciding on your scope, there are quite a few things to consider that would be unique to your situation as well. Obviously, you're going to want to consider your costs and your budget, but also your market and business strategy and where you want to end up at the end. How many, what presents a viable offer and what are you going to get enrollments into. And that could consider things like funding and licensing and regulations for the particular courses that you want to access as well. If you're sort of a clean slate and not setting up an RTO to go into any particular industry, you might think about aligning with the experience of your team to ensure that, you are qualified and you do have an understanding of what people in that industry are looking for and sort of approach it from that point of view. You could have a look at the skills shortages lists released through governments and skills needs or popular courses in various different industries. You can have a look at who delivers, what other RTOs are delivering in the space of the courses that you want to have a look at. So actually, to go back a step there, we're looking at this Certificate 3 in Tourism. Just to let you know, you can actually go to the qualification, find this link here, find RTOs approved to deliver this qualification, and that will show you everybody that has it on scope. Now, the only problem with that is that you don't know whether they're actively marketing it or even accepting enrollments into that course at this moment without doing some further research into it. But it is a sort of base point to give you some data about that course. So this one has a total of 60 RTOs that currently have that particular qualification on scope. So that's also something to consider. And like I was talking about before, you might want to consider what's best for after you get registered, what might require a higher outlay or maybe wouldn't present an opportunity to immediately get enrollments into after your initial registration, and you might choose to apply for a scope extension once you're registered, just in order to get registered as soon as possible with as minimal outlay as possible and as minimal risks as well in terms of getting through your application successfully. So RTOs can fall into a number of different structures or entity types. The most common is a PTY Ltd, and commonly a lot of people set up a new company when creating an RTO. You can attach an RTO registration to an existing company as well, but creating a new company has its benefits as well in that you could later then sell that company and thereby selling the RTO. So that's something to consider as well. You might have a PTY Ltd or an LTD. That entity might also be owned by a trust. So in that case, the trust would be an owner and the PTY Ltd would still be the registered RTO. Yeah, so if you are owned by another entity, that entity could help demonstrate financial viability in the future. It's actually not about an initial registration so much as it is about applying for certain funding contracts down the track. So there are a number of different delivery models to consider as well that are going to affect the size and shape of your project too. So recognition of prior learning, or RPL, is it's like an assessment only pathway for students who have previous experience but don't hold the formal qualifications and so it's a fast track option. Well, that actually requires quite a lot of paperwork to do it properly, so not always totally fast track, but it's a way to ensure that those students don't have to repeat learning that they've already done. And all RTOs are required to actually offer RPL for their qualifications and courses, except sometimes certain licenses and first aid units don't allow for that. Face-to-face options include workplace-based, so where you would then be targeting your course to students who are already working in the industry in a relevant role where they would be able to practice their skills and be assessed against the units included in your course. And it could also include classroom-based courses, and classroom-based courses may also have a work placement component. So where the course requires some practical assessment or some workplace hours, but you know, your cohort is not actually working, you can do it that way as a placement arrangement with employers. Another one, not on my list, but you might also have set up some student clinic, like I'm thinking of massages, student clinic, or you might have a student salon for beauty or other simulated training environments under face-to-face as well. I've got a few. I seem to have missed a lot of the chat, sorry. I will come to the chat in a second. I'll just keep going through this slide for a moment. But online or distance delivery as well, obviously both of these are quite different from one or another and may present some compliance or quality issues, like there may be parts of the units that actually it's quite hard to assess in those contexts, but it might be, so often, you know, a safe way to go about it is to blend, where you'll have components delivered in these face-to-face contexts and others that might be done either online or via distance. In addition to your considerations of materials and, you know, demands of the market, you need to consider learner needs, the training package requirements, like I was talking about, like are these units actually things that can be assessed in these ways? And the availability of resources on the market that are quality enough to show compliance against particularly this clause, clause 1.8, which is one of the top areas of non-compliances for RTOs. Yeah, I mean, you can also develop resources, but obviously that's going to have a certain higher level cost or effort required than if you were able to purchase resources for the course that you want from a provider that is quality. So I'm going to go to the chat for a second because I've overlooked it for a few minutes. Okay. So Lisa's saying, trainers are employed under individual contracts, unless you're at TAFE, of course. TAFE uses an award. Yeah, so Gary's saying there's no specific award usually for RTOs. And Neil is saying Educational Services Award 2010 using a tax file number, or many people use AVN options for trainers. Okay, so how long is course accreditation valid for these days? Not sure off the top of my head. I think it's longer than 3 years. I think it's 7 years now. I'd have to double check that though, Gary, honestly. And obviously RTO accreditation now goes, RTO registration, I should say, now goes for 7 years. So I don't know if I'm getting my wires crossed. It could be 5 years as well. Vet fee help ceased, yes. Yes, vet student loans now. Vet student loans not overly relevant to new providers. It's not actually available to apply for the first 3 years of operation. So it's like really not an entry point to be considering. You need to look at mainly, you know, government funding as well. It's another process that you have to apply for. So you really need to look at what courses you can market that students will actually pay for themselves, initially at least, until you explore other funding options. So this is one of the reasons we are seeing a push to a lot of providers wanting to do CRICOS, because you don't really have that problem with CRICOS. In general, overseas students are willing and able to pay for their own courses and studies, whereas domestic students can access that state funding from RTOs that do have that state funding. So it's very difficult to get them to pay for many courses that are funded, unless it's sort of a niche area would be maybe an exception to that, or unless you have a particular presence in an industry or market strategy that is different. If the student enrolled classroom-based option, can they later change to RPL? So a student, yes, a student should be able to apply for RPL at any point, but it's your responsibility to offer them the RPL before they enroll, because ideally you want to take them through the RPL for whichever relevant units at the start, so that they don't have to do the classroom training for whichever units they're able to be assessed as through RPL. But if a student was to come to you and they'd started the classroom training for some units and then decided they wanted to do RPL, you would then take that application at that point. Not sure what this reference is, Neil. Is that about the duration of course accreditation? Because I think, or is that about vet student loans? Neil's posted a link here in the chat bar. Oh, yes. Yes. They need to have been delivering a course for at least 3 years prior to enrolment. Yes, that's sort of what I was saying about that it's not an entry point. Like vet student loans is something you would have to look at least 3 years after your registration. Yeah. Is everyone sort of comfortable with what that program actually is? I might just touch on it quickly. Basically, we did have vet fee help. It's now undergone a major overhaul and name change, and what was called vet fee help, we're now calling vet student loans. And basically, it's a loan scheme where students of providers, approved providers for that scheme, are able to get their courses paid for from the government via a loan. It's basically the vet equivalent to HECS, and it's been out, I think it was about 2011 or so when vet fee help first came out. And, you know, we've probably all seen lots of updates in the news about all of that, so I might be rambling on to preaching to the choir, but yeah, you know, there's been a lot of activities and investigation of providers doing dodgy things because there was so much enrolments and so many people pulling down huge numbers and amounts of money, government money, through that scheme. Yeah, I'm gonna keep moving. So resources and systems required. We've sort of touched on most of this, I think. This is a bit of a redundant slide I need to take out. If anyone has any questions on any of that, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving. And I think we've sort of touched on any of this. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in all these areas that we could go into, but I sort of want to get to the actual application process as well, because I think that's most useful to everyone. So comparison of acquisition of RTO versus RTO setup. Look, as I was saying, you can technically buy an RTO by buying a company. So it is something you could be looking into as a fast way to enter the market rather than having to go through the application process. The problem is you often don't really know what you're getting. So, you know, a lot of people that might be selling their RTOs, they might be looking for an exit strategy because they've found it all too hard, because they haven't kept up with their obligations as an RTO, or there's a problem they haven't been able to solve. But, you know, they might also have built a great business, and it actually is a good opportunity and a good investment. It's just hard to determine that. So what we usually say is that you may need to conduct your own internal audit of, get an expert to conduct that internal audit to determine whether there are compliance risks and how substantial they are, in order to sort of assess whether or not it would be viable. But the problem with that is you're then reliant on that RTO providing the information and participating transparently in the audit process. So, you know, but I would say if the seller is able to provide up-to-date or recent reports or audit reports from the regulator or from any other people that have conducted audits, that would also contribute to what you might be able to find out there. And, you know, if they're not able to be transparent about any of that stuff, then that would be a red flag, obviously. RTO setup, as I said, does take longer, and it does have certain risks. Like, there are actually quite a number of RTO applications that don't get through audit at the first turn, and then that do even eventually get rejected and don't get their registration at all. Those risks can be controlled with, you know, the expertise of people that know what they're doing, and those good quality resources, and getting all the really good quality systems in place. I also see the advantage to RTO setup is that you are actually involved in the process. So through the process, you know, it is, because it does take a bit longer, and you are working hopefully with a consultant who's trying to understand your needs and match them to the requirements. You know, you do learn about your obligations and regulations as you go along. So you're not just completely thrown in the deep end. So Gary's got a question. I'm interested to find out if there's any database type system for recording student feedback for quality indicator reporting. We had the SMART system at one time, but now nothing. Yeah, so my understanding is you can use you can load up, so you need to use the questions and the answers for quality indicator reporting. This is about, sorry, I should explain. Quality indicator reporting is compulsory surveys that the government puts out that has certain wording that assess student engagement, learner engagement, and employer satisfaction. So there's employer surveys and student surveys that the RTO has to collect. And the government's prescribed the questions, the order of the questions, and the answers that must be collected, like the options. It's a Likert scale, I think. So, you know, options for responding. So my idea is, yes, like you're saying, Gary, you can use SurveyMonkey or any online system. So you could use a survey functionality through your student management system, and some student management systems might even come with the questions loaded up into them. If they have survey functionality, you know, many of the smarter ones might do that. So how long would it take to set up? It's really just an administrative process to set up the questions in the correct order and the answers in the correct order in the survey. So it would depend on the system that you're using and the capabilities of your staff. But I think it's much better. I mean, I'm obviously a bit of an online person, like even doing webinars, but I think it's worth taking the time to set these things up right if it's going to be automated going forward and save you from individually entering each response into a spreadsheet in order to collate it. Oh, how long will it take to set up? Oh, sorry. So we're talking about registration applications, I think. So last one took 14 months, start to registration, 5 months waiting on ASQA, Gary says. It unfortunately is not an easy question to answer, and one that you know, often speaking to people about, but basically there's no really good benchmark. Like this sort of does bring me into the next part where we're starting to talk more about the actual application process. So I'll open that slide. But the application process, you know, you're first going to submit the required evidence, and then you're going to wait for your audit. Basically, there's these two parts. And once you submit your required evidence, your audit could be called very quickly, or it could be called very slowly. And there's very little transparency from the regulator, certainly from ASQA, which is where we see most of the applications going through, about why one application would be processed so slowly when another one that might be the same or very similar, or it might even be a smaller application, you know, takes longer to go to audit, to be assessed. And then, you know, and then there's also the audit process itself, whereby, you know, it's a day, it's a usually 1 day, it could be 2-day site audit. And then following that, you've got to wait for them to get back to you with the outcome of the audit. So, and that the outcome of the audit is supposed to be provided to the applicant within 15 working days. But I've seen situations where there's been no non-compliances and that 15 days is turned into 45 with no explanation from the regulator. So unfortunately, it is just a bit of a guessing game. The best I can really do is give you sort of an average time frame. And my sort of average time frame is 6 months, or that's the best working time frame I can give you. It does depend on a few other things as well, like the speed of processing and the way that ASQA turns over your application is the biggest factor, and it's an uncontrolled factor. But the other factors will be things like your clarity about what you want to put on scope, and your readiness to proceed, and you know, your clarity about certain other things like who's going to be involved in the business, for example. If there are a lot of changes to that at the start, you know, it might slow down being able to actually submit your application. And also the availability and readiness of the training and assessment materials that you need. So if there's something available in the market, you know, great, you can purchase it and hopefully pretty much be good to go. But if there's a niche area or a course that hasn't been developed for in your area, you might need to work with, you know, a simultaneous project to actually develop the right training and assessment materials alongside your application, and you would coordinate when you submit your application with when those are ready. Yes, so that's similar to what you're saying now, Gary. You actually spent the first 9 months writing courses and setting up everything. Yes, so the 14-month time frame was really only 5 months waiting from application to audit. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on the readiness of those systems and how quickly, like if you're using expertise rather than writing everything from scratch, you might be able to be ready to submit the application quite quickly. And that is one of the advantages of working with somebody who knows the process as well. Neil's got a time frame. One was 16 weeks from application to audit, and then 6 weeks to approval for 3 qualifications. And that was an RTO and CRICOS. Yeah, so that's another time frame again. And I had a similar one, although mine was for 1 qualification. Last year it was roughly about a similar time frame to that. And recently I've seen audits called within a matter of weeks for some applications, for some domestic applications. And, you know, I've had other ones that were submitted months ago and we've heard nothing about an audit. So it's just inconsistent, and you just don't get much information from the regulators about that. The average cost to set up. That's a tricky one because it does depend what you want to do. So CRICOS applications would be more expensive because you've got more requirements. Let me go back. And it's more complicated. CRICOS is more complicated. You need to have a building at the start, and because your building is tied to the amount of students that you're going to actually be able to enroll, you need to have the building before you can apply. So that's an additional cost on top of the other things I've mentioned. So there's also application fees. So if you're lodging a domestic application, it's about $8,800. It does go up a bit more though if you want to add more than, I think, 4 qualifications, but I wouldn't advise that anybody puts that many on their initial scope of registration. And then you've got, for your CRICOS application, it's $9,000 as a starting point for the application fee. So you've got both of those costs together. If you're trying to get CRICOS, you'd have $17,000 to pay. And then you've got any consulting fees and charges for like policies and systems that you'd be buying. Student management system is really not a big cost because you don't actually need it until right before audit. So, you know, that's $100 or something like that. But your materials are going to vary dramatically depending on what's available in the market, whether or not you're having something developed, how many units are around. If you're going to try and do online, that probably blows up, well, that could blow up the cost because then you've also got to have a system for running the online course. So yeah, there's just a lot of different variables. It depends on how many courses as well. So look, bare bones is probably around like I would say 80. Like you could probably do it for $50,000 maybe if you only did a couple of units and you didn't need any specific infrastructure and it was a domestic RTO setup. But I would say I would want you to have a contingency fund for any unexpected things that pop up. So I would say $80,000 is probably the minimum, and then anywhere up to a couple of $100,000 if your budget allows for that. So what happens at the start of the process is that you will do a complete budget and you'll cost out everything in order to get the financial viability forms signed off by your accountant. So they do sort of encourage you to, look carefully at what everything is going to cost you for your setup and your operations after that, so that you can decide whether or not to sort of proceed as well. I mean, you do need to decide what your budget is going to be for the project, I suppose. So does anyone want to ask any questions about this evidence, or I might keep going? Tell me if I need to come back. So for, oops, sorry about that. Okay, next. So for the application process, as soon as you've, what you're also going to do is start preparing for audit. So either as soon as you've lodged or before that, you'll start preparing everything else for audit. So, hopefully you would have already started your training and assessment strategies and your industry consultation and things like that need to be in place. But basically what you're going to show at audit is everything that we've already discussed, having those policies and procedures in place, and having, made decisions about what systems you're going to have, who's going to be your minimal staffing and what roles are they going to be in, who are going to be your trainers and assessors for your course. And you need to have access to all of that. You need to have access to your trainers, access to all of your course materials, and your course materials need to support the rationale and everything that you've designed through your training and assessment strategies. So they may need to be customized for the particular type of delivery that you intend to do and line up with feedback that you've got from your industry consultation as well. Policies and procedures are quite important. At initial, probably more important than any other type of audit you would get, because at this point, like as an initial application, what we're really looking at is what you're proposing to do with your RTO. So you haven't started doing any of it yet. So the auditors are going to evidence a lot of things by looking at your policies and procedures. So you're going to show what you intend to do. Later on when they come back, they're going to look at what did you actually do? And then does it line up with your policies? But more importantly, does it line up with the standards? Yeah, so a couple more comments from our experts in the room. Gary is talking about, you know, buying the resources, you do still need to make sure that it meets the requirements, which is sort of what I was talking about with aligning it to the TAS and the delivery method and the target group. And you know, you need to carefully consider all of this in relation to each other, which is why I said TAS. I shouldn't do that. The training and assessment strategy, which is that detailed document that lays out everything for your course. So yeah, Neil's sort of saying ASCA has preferences and non-preferences about commercial providers of resources, and your consultant, if you work with a consultant, might also have some preferences about which resource providers may be suitable or may not be suitable, but ultimately, you know, you and your consultant would need to review those purchase materials and do a quality review of whether or not they're going to be suitable for what you want to do and whether or not they're going to pass audit. So that's very much a big part of what I would do with my clients who are looking at purchasing materials from anywhere really, is review and make sure prior to purchase as much as possible if it's going to work and how much work would be required if it does need fixing, and then who's going to do that work as well. So I think we've talked about a lot of this. Also, another thing for your audit, obviously you're going to have your training and assessment strategy. You're going to have done industry consultation. So you'll have evidence of who you consulted and what they said and how that informed your course. And you'll have some marketing materials, pre-course information that you would provide to students and employers. So basically you're going to show, look, I have everything that I need to be able to enroll this student, show them the policies and procedures. I've got all the agreements in place that I would need to have with a workplace or a work placement arrangement. I've got all the agreements that I need to have to hire the rooms if you're going to hire a room somewhere to deliver the courses. It all needs to basically be in place. Equipment would need to be purchased, or you'd have to have an agreement with someone about hiring any equipment that you would need to use to deliver your courses. And you need to have detailed files for each trainer and assessor who you are proposing to deliver your course. So that in itself is also another big job to check exactly whether each trainer and assessor is suitably qualified, because that's another big area of possible non-compliance there. Yeah, Gary said he's paid 20K for resources and ended up throwing them to the one side and wrote the stuff himself. Yes, I mean, that's the trouble with buying resources. If they aren't good, you might think, oh, we'll make the changes, but it's more hassle to make the changes to somebody else's stuff. And in the end, you know, you don't necessarily own it if you do that. So you do need to be very, very careful who you buy resources from, and that they are good quality. So yeah, you would really need a consultant to help you understand what you're getting and whether it's suitable. There's no regulator for resource developers, that's right. So LLN is another, look, I've slipped another acronym in, sorry guys. So language learning and numeracy assessment, which would be done prior to your enrolment to assess the levels of language learning and numeracy that students would have to ensure that your students are going to actually be able to complete the course that you intend to enroll them into. And it would be so that you can also assess any needs for individual support that certain students might have and make a plan to know that you can actually provide the students with that support before you enroll them. Gary has a tip. Make sure you buy editable resources if going down that road. Absolutely. That's the way we do it. If you are looking at EduWorks resources, our resources, you know, they are all provided in Word and other Office applications so that you can edit them yourself. Because, yeah, not being able to contextualize or adapt if you hit a non-compliance or a quality issue, or you get some feedback and you need to fix it or improve it, make it more suitable, you need to be able to edit it. In advance of your audit, you'll receive an audit notification, and that will sort of lay out what you need to have access to on the day. You can bring along your consultant. Usually your CEO must be present, although they can also usually authorize someone to attend on their behalf, which has recently happened to me, that someone I'm working with has been allowed to authorize someone to act on their behalf when they're out of the country. So those things you would negotiate with the auditor when you get a call to schedule a time and date. Again, the length of notice in advance of the audit is a little bit variable. It's like, in my experience, usually 2 or 3 weeks, but I recently had one called 2 months in advance. I've also had them called 2 months in advance and then moved forward a month. So again, consistency is a bit of an issue. You should take detailed notes, or your consultant may be able to take detailed notes for you to ensure that you can go back to those if you do need to debate any of the findings in your audit report at the end. There is an audit tool on the ASCA website that you can go through to assess your own application prior to audit. Yeah, step length and expectations vary. Yeah, so like when I'm preparing a client for audit, I'll always prepare for the worst possible auditor that I may have come across in my experience, and try to, you know, just lay everything out so that, you know, regardless of the different interpretations or readings or expectations, I'm going to get a compliant result either way, because, you know, there is some different feedback that auditors give, or different findings, different rigour with which they will audit your application depending on who is actually assigned to conduct it. Yes, so make sure you know what's going on at all times in your audit, and ask the auditor if you're not sure what is happening, although you don't want to sort of disclose any apparent sense of not being aware of what your RTO is intending to do, or what you're intending to do with your application. As I said, you're supposed to receive your audit outcome within 15 days, and the audit outcome will either tell you that you've been approved and all compliant, and you'll receive your RTO ID number and certificate, and you can start training. Or, well, actually you can start marketing, because you can't start marketing until you get your RTO approved. So there needs to be nothing, like, you can design what you must design course information, but you cannot provide it to anybody or publish it on a website before you are approved. If there are non-compliances in your report, you may be given a chance to submit rectifications or apply for reconsideration, which would incur an additional application fee. It's not the full application fee, but there is a fee for that. Rectifications, there's not a fee for. And in either case, these kinds of, you can also, if you're not allowed to rectify, you can appeal the decision through the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So if everything goes, doesn't go to plan, you will end up at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal as your last port of call to try to get any decisions overturned. I would just say, yes, obviously, if in situation number 2, if there are non-compliances, this is going to extend any timeframes for completion of the project, because there may be various rounds. So you might submit a rectification, and now they're going to take another 15 days at least to assess that. And then they might come back to you and say, okay, well, you're either compliant or again, we've found more non-compliances, and you'd probably at this point probably have to apply for reconsideration. Now, it is possible you don't actually get the chance to rectify or apply for reconsideration if the non-compliances are found to be critical. So this is actually a change. This is new. It's possible your application can get overturned. They just don't think it's something that you can rectify, and in which case you would still have the option to go through the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, but you do need to be aware that this is the risk. Your application could get overturned and be unsuccessful if you launch into it without knowing what you're doing, or having some experts on hand that know what they're doing, ideally. Gary's saying thank you for diplomatic explanation of the problem with inconsistent auditing. I'm not sure if you're an auditor, Gary, but yeah, no, I understand both sides of the fence. We do external auditing as well as internal auditing, and it's a difficult position to be in as well. But yeah, it would be good if there was a bit of consistency as well in general. But yeah, so choosing a consultant. So look, you know, like I think Gary was saying earlier that he'd spent months and months developing policies and procedures. A consultant will come with those templates, will know how to customize those templates, and will know how to make them work for your business strategy. You know, you could save yourself making costly mistakes, e.g. buying $20,000 worth of materials that are not actually something that's going to pass audit or be useful for you. You will basically be able to ensure you're compliant. Okay, all of these things, of course, are if you get a quality consultant. There are a lot of people out there who don't, unfortunately, actually know what they're doing, or they may not be getting successful results in their application. So that's something you want to consider. A consultant will be able to help you consider all angles and make the best decisions, and hopefully move forward quickly with those decisions as well. So having gone through the process before, they would know, you know, how not making a decision or leaving things open-ended might impact on your project timeframes and budgets and things like that. A consultant will know how to present an audit and how to present to an auditor diplomatically, and also how to give you a bit of guidance on what you should be doing at audit, or saying, you know, and auditors are people too, so they are friendly. It's not that you can't say anything. I often find them very friendly, but you just need to make sure that what you do and don't need to understand about your application, that you are around it, or your consultant is going to be there and represent those things that maybe you're not so sure of. Your consultant will be able to help you with all these difficult acronyms, understand vet speak, and what the significance of everything is, like what the communications that you might get from ASQA are and what they mean for you. A good consultant will have current knowledge of whatever the project is that you're working on. They should have worked on recent ones, because as I was saying, things are changing in the way it's regulated all the time. So they're going to have currency of that. So you might speak to a friend or another RTO owner who's like, yeah, I know how to do RTO setup because I did it 3 years ago. Well, a lot's changed in that time. So working with a consultant, you would be more comfortable in knowing that it's current. Similar to knowing the regulator's process. They'll be able to give you feedback and an external opinion and tell you when something is going to be a risk or a problem. Intervene and support if you do end up in a problem. Hopefully, I mean, I always aim to obviously foresee any problems way before they become problems. But on the other end, if you have problems with a consultant or with your application, you might need help fixing, you might need to change and go to another expert to get some help rescuing your application if it does all go wrong as well, and you've had bad advice, for example. So in choosing a consultant, you could consider whether they seem to understand what it is that you're trying to do with your business and why you want to become an RTO. Are they respected in their field? Are they working alone or in a group? a lot of consultants do work alone. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you have a group, you could, you know, you might expect for timeframes and things to move a little bit faster with that additional support, and also that they could draw on expertise of a whole team of people if something was outside of their particular knowledge areas. They might also be, you know, able to source a lot of that through their own networks as well, so that's also good. Can they help you with your future needs? So that's things like, you know, initial registration is one thing, but if in 2-3 years you want to apply, well, 3-4 years, let's say, you want to apply for vet student loans, will they know how to help you there? Because what ideally you want to set up a long-term working relationship with your consultant, so that if you need that policy that they wrote for you tweaked in the future, they would be usually the best person to do it, the most efficient person to do it, because it is their stuff. The same sort of for training and assessment materials. If you're using some materials that your consultant knows or works with, they may be able to actually help you fix those materials more so than if it's not something that they do work with. And, you know, are they a new company? Are they a new business? Will they be around when you need them in the future? Obviously, can you trust them? Do you feel that you trust them? Have they recently and successfully completed the process? So you could ask a consultant you're considering working with about outcomes they've had with other recent applications. And will they tell you the hard truth? And will they give you any assurances or guarantees on their work? Can they help you with training and assessment materials is also important. They may be able to just help you research. If they don't have anything, they may be able to help source and look into what is available and then review what is available on the market. But that may be different from, as I said, providing their own materials, where they could be more able to actually make changes or get changes made for you if needed. Cost is a factor, and it's usually the first question everyone asks me: how much is the package? But you do need to consider cost against the quality of what you're receiving, of course. So that's the end of my super long presentation, and it's now Q&A time. Any other questions? I have sort of been fielding them as I go, so maybe not so much. And we can also do follow-up one-on-ones. User and Neil, I've missed something above, have I? If you're providing CRICOS course for English, how do they pass LLN? The English, there's actually English proficiency requirements for any student visa application. So there's actually some additional English requirements that apply for CRICOS courses that don't apply to RTO. But so I think that is IELTS 5.5 off the top of my head. So the students need to have already shown their proficiency by completing an IELTS or equivalent English language test. So you could set your own level up and beyond the minimum required by the visa, but otherwise you would have the visa level requirement tied to your CRICOS course. But then LLN is really different, because LLN, so you still have to worry about language learning and numeracy outside of do they speak your actual language. It's also, is their level of language to the appropriate level? Are their writing skills going to be enough to do your tasks, and numeracy similarly? So the intent of LLN is a bit different, I think, from the intent of the English language proficiency requirements, because with LLN, it's also about assessing students' needs so that you can support the students, not only an entry requirement. Yeah, Neil's saying there are varying levels of the IELTS level. I think that may have changed in the new visa that's come out, Neil, because I was looking at that recently. But I might just try to pull that up. So there's a new visa subclass. So the visa class that relates to all CRICOS delivered courses is the subclass 500. Now, yes, I mean, every individual visa is going to be slightly different, like depending on what country they come from and things like that. But there are some overarching things that apply across all of the courses. Yeah, so the visa website looks like it's saying that there's a 5.5 minimum across all now. I don't know if that's a change, but yeah. So what other questions have I missed? Any tips on 1.8 for the CRICOS application? There's a question, clearly demonstrated capacity to deliver education to a satisfactory standard. I mean, not really. You need to have, you know, I probably state certain things that the RTO or the applicant has put in place to ensure they do deliver education to a satisfactory standard. Have they purchased high quality training and assessment materials? Have they invested in facilities and equipment? Have they sourced expertise to work on the application with them? Do they have policies and procedures that state that they have quality mechanisms in place? And also, of course, you would look at if the people involved in owning or running the RTO did have any previous experience in the education industry. Yes, that's right, Neil. So you would still need to assess for those LLN levels additionally to the CRICOS requirements. The CRICOS requirements are additional to the RTO requirements, so the RTO requirements still stand. Cost of an AAT appeal. I do not know off the top of my head. I think it might be around $800, $900. But I think there's a couple of different types of appeals as well. Yeah, I'm not really in a position to advise off the top of my head, sorry. Yeah, I believe all those costs are available through the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. It's not huge, like ask for application fees and ask for reconsideration fees are much, much more than that. But, you know, you still don't want to end up with that AAT really, even though I've had pretty good experiences with them, but like, you know, it's just too big of a risk. You could get rejected at that point and lose everything you've invested. So, I might wrap up. Yeah, I would just welcome, I guess there's two things I want to say in closing. You know, many of you have come from our existing inquiries list and so maybe already considering working with us, and other people have come through various call outs I've put on LinkedIn and things. People who are considering working with us, we do have a special offer at the moment, which is 10% off a strategy session. So that would be for anyone who doesn't have a really clear idea on what they should be putting on their initial application or what their business plan looks like, either just for the first 12 months or even going forward if you want to map out your first 2-3 years to be really clear of that before you started looking into doing the setup. That would be a good idea. So yeah, we've got 10% off strategy sessions if it's booked before the end of February. So if you want a quote for that, it'd be a good time to get onto it. The other thing I would implore upon you is that it's a really good time of year to get your applications started, because I guess as it gets later on into the year, there's more and more chance that it, you know, might not get wrapped up this calendar year. So it's always a good idea to get them started early on in the year so that, you know, you've got a pretty good idea that, you know, most likely you'll be able to begin starting training next calendar year, if not before. And what I would also just like to mention is we will try and follow up with everyone individually. So I'm going to send out the recording, but also anyone who has an opportunity or has expressed some interest, we're going to be giving you a call in the next 1 to 2 weeks. If anyone doesn't want to call back, feel free to let me know that. Or if anyone would prefer not to be called just yet, maybe in 2 or 3 months, that's fine as well. But if you want to let me know, that'd be good, because otherwise we will schedule a call up and see a call with you and see what further support you might need in processing all of this. So I hope it's been useful, and thank you everyone for your massive chunk of time, and please get in touch with anything else. Thanks, Rag. Thanks, Gary. Thanks.